have, yeah.
Excellent. There's a wonderful little steak place I like to go to. Now, you don't think steak when you go to it, but it's a French steak place.
What's the name of it?
It's Le Venetian, which
Yeah.
sounds really terrible. It's
Robert
Italian. I'll
should be
get
on
it for
his
you
way
before we
in.
leave.
That's the only other one I've seen.
I'm taking all the
Well, I need to be there.
recommendations.
I assume so. I haven't heard otherwise.
We're on TV right now.
We're on TV. All right. Okay, I've been told that we're on TV, so I am going to call the City Council Conference meeting of October 23rd to order. We have 2 items on our agenda. We have item number 1 is a discussion regarding Stormwater Citizen Committee Public Input Report. And item number 2 is a continued discussion regarding possible election dates for the Transportation Bond Program and or stormwater projects. And we're going to start off with a presentation from Amanda Nairn and her sidekick, or she's still my sidekick.
I prefer stalker. Her stalker.
Her
Please.
stalker. Okay,
I'll trade seats.
our esteemed co-chairs of the Stormwater Citizen Committee, and we have a couple of other members of the committee sitting over here and back here. So we appreciate y'all being here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. This is going to be a presentation on the feedback that we've been gathering since last spring over the summer, and as recent as today, we got some results on some more feedback, and I think council received those via email. There's a lot of information in here.
And we, by the way, Brenda passed that out to all of you because I know there was a possibility people didn't get to look at it.
Yes,
So
but
you
literally we
passed
all got it today at 3 o'clock or 3:30 or whatever. We got it in the same email. So that will be towards the end, that information. But anyway, we appreciate the opportunity to be here. And the beginning of the presentation, I'm going to go through kind of quickly because it's kind of a review of everything that we all know very well, just a little bit of a history. And then we'll get to the information on the feedback. Andy, do you have anything you want to?
No, not at all. I think some of you really will go through fast. We thought it was important, though, to talk about kind of the history. I know that I think Councilor Scott, I think you're new since although I think you've heard some of this presentation. You were kind enough to join the last time we presented to the council. But we felt like it'd be good to go back and give kind of a history of how did we get here. So we'll spend a lot of time on that, but we wanted to do that today. So I don't know if you want to start that, Amanda, or I can, either one.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, it's hard to believe, but the Citizens Stormwater Committee was created in April of 2017. It does consist of still living Citizens Committee as we stand today. It's a 16-member committee that was made up of every single ward within the city. That was important to, I think, the mayor when she appointed that committee. Amanda and I represent certainly our wards, but also serve as co-chairs. On the next slide, I think you have the list of those individuals. I think it's a really diverse group. In fact, I've not been shy about telling many of you and many citizens about how I think the diversity within this committee was really helpful to us reaching some cohesiveness. The members of this committee, I would say there are people here that very much were against the last stormwater proposal when it was put forward, and there are also people that were very much in favor. And I think in every area in between. And so I think one of the good things that I would report as a chairperson on this, co-chair, would be that the group really did coalesce and come up with, I think, a really good solutions, good recommendations that may need some tweaking, but certainly were well thought out from the entire committee. So Andy, you can jump in, Ryan, keep going.
So the committee defined stormwater as including both water quality and flooding. That was very important. That's in our recommendations. We felt like those both need to be addressed. So we wanted to be sure that when we talk about stormwater, we're talking about both of those things. That was a unanimous agreement upon the committee. If you remember, one of our recommendations was a $59 million bond for 33 projects, infrastructure for flood mitigation. So we're talking about a reservation bond there that, of course, would be approved by the voters. And then water quality related stormwater program with a budget of $7.4 million. That's the utility. When we talk about the utility, that's what we're referring to then. There were also some implementation of some policies and some recommendations we made moving forward as far as an oversight committee and defining some policies and things like that. Again, these are things that you all are familiar with. Here's
I
a,
do as a reminder, man, if I may, the $7.4 million, one of the things the committee did analyze was that the end all be all? Is that going to solve all of the stormwater issues within the community? And I think it's important to know that that really doesn't. There's still a lot of other things. But we felt like as a committee, that was the reasonable level of utility that would allow us to accomplish much of what we would like to do. But there's still, I don't want anyone to get the impression that we're solved and from that point forward, there wouldn't be other needs. There still are, and the committee felt like this was the way to meet as many of those needs as possible at a relatively cost that we felt like would, and we'll get into that, I think, as we go forward, but a cost that was appropriate. So.
and by the way, same with the bond. We have about
Yeah,
twice as many
absolutely.
projects dollar-wise as what have been identified for this initial bond recommendation. So we felt like that bite was too big of a one to take at once, and that's why we chose a lesser amount. So here's the citywide maps for the infrastructure projects that we've discussed. These, by the way, were presented at all the open houses. We'll get to that, but this map was one of the popular posters.
And it represents every ward within the city. That was a very important factor for the Citizens Committee, was that we think that as the transportation bond has in the past been something that has been very important to have every ward be represented, also very important within the stormwater utility efforts and the bond itself to have the entire community, and realize there's a lot of diversity within Norman. Each of you represent a very different ward, but to make sure that each of your wards is represented was very important, with at least 3 projects, by the way, within that bond. So it's not just one project, it was 3 projects, or is 3 projects.
So the recommendations, again, this is review. Nothing has changed since we last presented these to you, but this is what we've been presenting to the residents of Norman, was to generate $4.5 million for the utility fee. The committee wanted to continue the 3.1 coming out of the general fund as of now. Felt like in order to keep fees low. The preferred option was a $625 flat fee for residential, with having the low income that we currently have on other utilities, making that available for this as well. And then for businesses, we have this tiered fee based on parcel size of the property. This non-residential chart you're going to see through all of our options. That did not change, so it's going to be the same chart through all of our residential options that we took to the citizens. We define residential properties as a developed parcel with 4 or less dwelling units. Non-residential obviously would be properties with 4 or more dwelling units, and other property types such as commercial and industrial. And this parcel size data is obtained from Cleveland County Assessor. This is not something that is somebody making up to put on a website. This is real assessor data that people's property are assessed upon every year. So this is where this would come from.
And that was a real important distinction. The committee spent quite a bit of time talking about that. We may have mentioned this the last time we reported to you, but I think that it was important to have a neutral third-party source. We felt like for transparency and for people for the citizenry to feel as though they can go and find a website and see what their parcel size is. One of the challenges we heard in the last utility vote was that people felt wasn't that they weren't necessarily confident, but they just were unsure. And what does that mean? And there just seemed to be a lack of understanding about what that really meant for them on the impervious surface argument. And so, again, this was our effort to try to find a source where someone could go and find a place to access information.
Yeah, Councilmember Bierman.
I feel like you mentioned this at one of the stormwater open houses. How does this break down in terms of the percentage of contribution to runoff from commercial versus residential properties versus what the fee is going to be covering on both sides?
It's pretty right on point.
Almost exactly.
And I'm
1%.
pulling it up right now. And this is in your stormwater recommendations that you got last spring. You remember these fee pages that have these pie charts along the bottom? I'm just telling you for easy access if you want to look at it when you get home. But on the 625 flat fee and the non-residential chart that we showed you just a minute ago, the impervious area in Norman, 44% is non-residential. They make up 44% of non-residential makes up 44% of the impervious area. Residential is 56%. When you look at this fee structure, the 625 flat fee, the revenue that it generates for non-residential is 42%, so you're 2% off, and 58% for residential. again, you're 2% off. So the revenue generated by non-residential and residential is really almost spot on with the amount of hard surface those pick up, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
And that was important. I think Councilman Hickman and Councilman Castleberry were both part of the group that sat in on any of these meetings. And that was important. Try to be as equitable as we could between those two groups.
And that's the same across the board with all 3 residential options that we provided. Okay, they're all within that, very, very close to that window. All right, so some of the recommendations that we wanted figured out before this should go to a vote of the people is the appeals process, how that exactly would work. We also, in the budget for the utility, have a neighborhood assistance program. We would like, and I think you guys have been presented drafts of those policies. Nothing's been finalized, but I think staff has come to you with drafts of those. The neighborhood assistance program would be to assist private infrastructure, not HOAs. Private neighborhoods that have private infrastructure or individuals that have private infrastructure, that would be an assistant program for that. I think you guys are still in the process of talking about that. That having the help of a communications firm, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but that has been really great. That's going to be where this feedback comes from. We would like both of them on the same ballot. An oversight committee that oversees these expenditures in the future, that things are being, that's staying on track and being well taken care of. And then also something we talked about, we've been asked a lot about credits and incentives, and the committee talked about them at length and decided that that's certainly something very easily that council could add now or into the future. If you wanted to wait a few years and you have the utility in place, then add those. It's really up to your discretion.
Some of the thought process on that from the feedback from the committee, as I recall, man, and this was not in our presentation, but was that people said that a lot of what made the last stormwater package hard was there was a lot of things to try to understand. So one of the reasons the incentives, we kept that out and based on committee was that trying to keep it as simple as possible right now for voters, with the idea that if there are things that need to be changed or altered in the future, surely that makes sense. But the more complicated you make it, the more opportunities are for people to say, I don't agree with that. And so that was part of our consideration as it relates to, and frankly, what incentives do you choose? Which ones do you not? And so it was just easier to bring it before you without having those built in. Another
big issue was that keeping the fee low and not using a lot of that money to administrate credits and things like that. I mean, that takes money to be processed, have somebody come to your property to make sure that they're still online in a year. We were worried about spending that money on administrative focuses and not in the ground making changes, doing things in our stormwater, where our stormwater needs are.
And so as a response to some early feedback we received, and I think some of you, in fact, actually reached out and said to us and said, well, I'd like to see what other options there might be. And so part of I guess the last time we presented to you, we mentioned a couple of different alternatives. These were also alternatives that to the 625 flat fee that we did present in each of our open houses. And so the first was that we would do a $5 flat fee for residential instead of the 625, so find maybe a little lower flat fee. Keep the same 4-tier rate structure for non-residential, so not a change there. That in essence would lose about $300,000, so it'd be the $4 million plus the $3.1 as far as how much money would be available for stormwater solutions. So that was alternative A. Then alternative B was a more of a tiered solution, a 3-tiered approach based on living area, which again, I think adds a complexity to that. Still have the 30% credit for low income customers, but have it be maybe a $3, $6, and $9 fee depending upon the living area. And we broke those down as they're shown on the screen of a little bit, basically anything less than about 1,870 square feet, a home of that size, a residence of that size, and then have a separation of any of the homes that are above 3,210 square feet would be on the higher tier. So when we did that ends up with about a $7.3 million. So still a little bit less than the 625 flat fee, but within that same tier structure. So that was an alternative also that was presented during the open houses. So now we're getting to the good stuff, right? So what you've been waiting to hear. All of those things that we just discussed very quickly were put onto posters for our open houses. But we did several activities to get input. We worked with Hahn Public, which was the communications consultant,
to kind of formulate the plan. We also have the microsite developed. Hopefully you guys have been to that, normanstormwater.com. That also had all of these options there.
Well, still getting comments on the.
I will look to staff for
I don't
that.
think we've closed off comments, have we?
No, we haven't, but I don't know that we've received anything in the last
Not-
month.
Not since really the last not since the last
Open house.
Open house. Usually after the open house is generated, so.
But it's still available to do so.
So it is still there if we want to maybe do something to stimulate public comment, like information about this meeting might stimulate some
Absolutely.
interest.
Yeah.
So we just need to keep reminding people it's there.
And I hope you've been there. It's a very nice microsite. So we were asked to engage with the community and get as much input as possible. So we've done open houses, as I've mentioned, focus groups, 2 surveys now, our microsite, and we use those as tools to hear the public and identify and address any concerns, and also to determine possible election dates based on community input. So quick. You guys have the report. I think you received it via email, the larger report on our recommendations. That has all of the official reports from Hahn and things like that are all in back of that if you really want to kind of delve into that data. But the first survey that we did was done last spring, if you remember. So that's just some background data on that. And here we go. So, go ahead.
Either way, I think we got some of these are pretty fast. I'm going to run through these, but the first question we asked was, do you think flooding in Norman is a critical safety issue or minor safety issue? This is back in March, so realize there's some things
Before our open houses.
before our open houses, and so you'll see that 52% said it was a minor issue, 38% said it was critical. For those of us that worked on stormwater, we say that's 90% it's an issue. So there's an issue. I think we all know that, but that's where our public kind of landed in that poll. Second question was, the city of Norman is considering new funding proposals to pay for flood mitigation and water quality infrastructure improvements. And have you heard anything about the proposal? Well, as we would expect, before we really went and did anything publicly, 76% said no. And so 20% said yes, which I think is interesting to see where that came from. And some of that's just kind of leaking through, I think, the process. That's again back in March. So we're
This was just random, but it was registered voters.
Correct. And it was, I think, 401 respondents that we reached by phone.
Yeah. Okay, the next question was talking about the Citizens Committee. It's been formed to propose a potential bond issue and fee structures for flood mitigation and water quality. Does knowing that a proposal was developed by a Citizens Committee make a difference? How does that make you feel? And so 55% said the Citizens Committee was helpful. At least they felt like that was a good thing. 28% said unsure. And then, of course, a few are less likely based on the Citizens Committee. So I don't know how much more information on that, but just simple data.
I would also add there that some more information we kind of got as we were holding the open houses, and there's several committee members in the room that were there. People would walk in the room, ready, not happy, really riled up about what they were going to see. And the more they heard from the committee members and the more they heard about the work that we did, the more I got so many comments when they were leaving, like, we came in here mad and now we're ready to support something. We appreciate the committee's effort. We appreciate hearing from the citizens that have formulated this plan. So you see a little bit of foreshadowing in that on this poll exactly, but you'll see a little bit more of it later.
So the next question was about the bond proposal and knowing that a Citizens Committee had identified approximately $59 million in potential bond projects. How does that make you view that? And would you be more or less likely to support? 45% said that made them more likely. And you can kind of see the split on unsure and less likely from that particular point of view. Then the last question that was asked back in March, I believe, was the last question, as I recall, was the question about asking voters to consider a fee structure for water quality projects and ongoing maintenance across Norman as it relates to stormwater. And one proposal would be based on the size of home. Residents of smaller homes would pay $3 with the $9 we already discussed. The other proposal would be more of a flat fee structure. And so what did the group prefer? And so you can see exactly kind of where that fit. There's a difference, 44% versus the flat fee of 26%. So you see where that kind of fell back in March.
I would note here, and I'll note it again later on some other that you see, 83% of people polled support something. They support something regarding stormwater. I would just add that there.
So Hahn, also in addition to the surveys, we held focus groups, and those focus groups were based on three major kind of groups within our community. First was an urban group. Second was more of an urban type group, and then the third was within the business community. And so hosted those three focus groups. The objectives listed there were just to better understand perception of water quality and flooding, so that people kind of got a feel for that. For perceptions on the stormwater committee, again following the same thing as the survey questions, and then gather information to be used when we decide to move forward with an outreach to the general public. So those were identified as the goals of the focus group. The results, there were some themes that came out of that. What you talking about?
Yeah, so it was very common, the small town, big city dichotomy. We feel like a small town, but we're really a big city. I think that was said in every single focus group multiple times. So that was common across all of those three different groups. Most of them understood stormwater to a certain degree, but also agreed that there was a need for a solution. That was a fairly common theme. A lot of anxiety about the past proposal. Government distrust came out of some of it, and the need for more information, which is something I think that we all agree on and are interested in. So, like I said, they recognized the stormwater as an issue and something needed to be done. Transparency was a common theme. Increased information regarding any details of future proposal. Again, this was held before any of our open houses, just so you know, for the timeline. So here's some quotes that came directly from the focus groups, and you have that bigger report again, like we said in what you were sent. Water quality, I'm not a chemist, I'm just a homeowner. What I read in the paper doesn't sound good, and when your water reservoir is called Lake Dirty Bird, you've got a problem. It's a huge problem. That was a business owner that said that. I don't necessarily need to read all of them, but you guys can read them. Again, this was a comment about the first round and not having the details sorted out that made a business owner, a little nervous about it. And
I thought that when I read them the first time, I thought that the comments were, pretty reflective of what I hear, what you see on Facebook, the comparison of the urban and the rural, the fact that the rural was so much more, had so much more distrust of the government, having lived in East Norman for a long time. I really get that.
Yeah.
So I thought they were really reflective of what I've heard.
I would agree. So Hahn had some messaging recommendations or some recommendations moving forward on communication. These are, again, still some ideas that came out of the focus groups. But our main source of drinking water, like Thunderbird's in danger of exceeding state and federal water quality standards for pollution. That was a common theme that they heard, maybe not in those words, but that people had concern about. Pollutants from stormwater runoff, end up in our creeks. These are things that Hahn has felt and been based on our survey that these are still important messages for the residents of Norman to learn about and hear about and discuss and be in open forums, because these are things that matter. Also quality of life, fixing the flooding, things like that will help our economic situation, will help our homeowners and things like that.
It was interesting also, some of the things, and this is an additional list of items that Hahn mentioned, but making sure that as we go forward, distinguishing between the previous proposal and this proposal with some real defined differences and understanding of what makes this different, so that there's distinction, so that not all stormwater proposals are made alike. And this is certainly not the same proposal. It's very different than what was put forth the last time, but making sure that that's noted and that it's communicated in a very clear and concise way was a big part of what Hahn had mentioned. With that same in mind, I think there's also there's always kind of that, do I trust government to use my dollars? And so transparency as much as possible. and allocating and making sure that committee members were appropriate, and also certainly each of you are people that can put yourselves in places to really answer questions. And I know that was a real important part of our open house strategy, which I know we're going to jump into now. And many of you were able to attend those, and I think that made a big difference. So appreciate that.
All right, so moving on to our open houses, I would just like to start by saying it was recommended to us by Hahn Public that we do 3. We did 6 in all different geographical parts of Norman. So we had a pretty good, we had a very good turnout overall. Again, like I said, we had 6, and it was stormwater committee members that kind of ran the open houses, that stood at stations, that discussed what was on the posters, that answered questions. That was received in a very positive way. People enjoyed that model. And then we sat down and had a moderated discussion, not moderated by any of us or any city staff or any council members. It was moderated by just kind of an objective person that we thought would be good at it. And people in Jerry Fleming, she's actually my Blue Thumb monitoring partner, but yeah.
Well, it was great.
She works with Oklahoma Water Survey.
Really, she wasn't recognized.
Who are these random people, right?
Right.
I thought, well, that was really good.
Yeah.
No, I
And one she
appreciate
couldn't be
that
at, so her husband stepped in, and he did great too. So, I think people enjoyed that and felt comfortable. Almost everybody talked that was sitting in the audience. I mean, one of them went for like 4 hours. I think the East Side Library was at least 4 hours, and we just kept taking questions because it was so packed. I know a couple of you guys were there. We wanted to listen to people as long as they wanted to talk. So total, we had 186 people attend. That is if everybody signed in, right? We had some that didn't. I know we had council members, we had, things like that. But, and we had over 100 comment cards and postcards submitted. This was, again, how we were trying to gather feedback on our options that we had presented to you guys in April. So this is coming from open houses. These charts now are from open house comment
And I think you
cards.
notice right off there's a distinction kind of between maybe the general public and that are out there from a phone survey versus a group that does know about stormwater and actually came to an event. And those open houses certainly reflect that. So you'll see right off the bat, how likely are you to support a general obligation bond to pay for stormwater infrastructure? Well, at least of the people that were able to attend the open houses, 54% said they were highly likely, and 16% said they were likely. So 70% of the people that attended after receiving information said, so education is key. 70% said they would certainly be supportive of a GO bond for infrastructure improvements.
And hands down, we got a lot of positive comments about that, about the general obligation bond.
So the second question was then how likely are you to be a bond proposal and also a utility fee? And again, a little less, a little lower number, but 66% of those respondents were likely or highly likely. And if you had the 9% for somewhat likely, then you're significantly above a supermajority, and almost 3/4 of the vote was, in fact, my math's not good. That is 3/4 of a vote of the people that responded said that they would be likely to support both. And you get into more of the which one of the proposed utility rate structures seems the most reasonable to you? And 35% said the committee option, which is the flat fee option.
625 flat.
625, thank you, 625 flat fee option. Alternative A is the $5 flat fee option. Alternative B is the tiered. And then you have kind of no response and something else that they would like us to consider for those others. So breakdown by fee type, flat fees 50%, 30% would tier. So kind of back and forth, I think. And we received a lot of, and that's kind of the comments that were made at the open houses. We've received a lot of that same thing where it was, I would say probably about that level of more, 50% sounds about right. At least my swag math was the flat fee seemed simpler, was kind of the answer we got. The tiered maybe more palatable for some. So
I would also note on the top one, we know by those numbers, 70% support something, right? They support something. They're in favor of something. I think that's an important number to remember.
I guess we could let them choose on the ballot.
That would be a billing nightmare for the city. 80% on this bottom one, 80% support something. I mean, I think that those are favorable numbers as far as trying to figure out in general if stormwater is supported.
So then you have a question about the proposed stormwater utility fee and how that relates with the general fund. And so there's $7.4 million of identified program needs. And so how much funding should be provided by the general fund? And when you look at that, you see the breakdown here of those.
We saw quite a dichotomy with extra comments on these cards on this one saying, boy, we'd really like to relieve the general fund, but we worry about fees being too high. You know, we did, and so they understood that difficulty that the committee was kind of in and wanting to help out the general fund, but at the same time worrying about fees too high. And then they weren't sure at that point how much of the general fund should pay for it, if any. That was a lot of the extra comments written on the card.
So I think, one thing I think the takeaway also to add, Amanda, that would be that 36% said yes, and then 28% said current funding. So kind of factor that into your thoughts. So I think, again, part of that is the proposal in the open house about how that was structured to reach that $7.4 million. But I know that's been a discussion item for council.
I think you have to consider that element of, which was one of the, bigger trends about people saying they didn't trust the city financially. And that comment from the one person that said, if we relieve the 3.1 million, then will you just take it and spend it on a armored vehicle or something? So when you haven't been able to explain to everybody that a utility can't be spent on anything else, that's the kind of thing people worry about. They think you're just giving them more money to spend on something they won't know what it is.
Sure.
So
And there were also questions in
we
the
heard that a lot the first go round.
There were also several questions in the open houses about, okay, well, what if council decides to cut that 3.1 million? And we acknowledge that that is certainly something that could happen and that council could decide to do. And they said, well, what do we do then? And I said, we're not council. We don't make those decisions. You need to let your council person know how you feel about it. If we get down to this being an option. So, people understood it well enough to ask those questions for sure. So quick takeaways, conclusions from the open house was generally people were in favor of the general obligation bond and the utility fee once more details were provided. Like I said, a lot of people came in and you could see it on their faces, mad. And I had numerous people come up to me afterwards and say, thank you so much. Now we understand it. We feel much better. Once we showed them that the budgets were all worked out and what projects were going to be done, they felt totally different and they were willing to support something. I had several people from Rural Ward 5 come up and say that to me. So the flat fee was generally preferred. And like we said a second ago, the participants were aware that the general fund may not be able to continue the 3.1 million, but wanted to make sure the fee was as low as possible. And again, that transparency message. Comments that were written on the cards. I don't think we have to read them all, but let's get it going and good start. And some people wanted to incentivize the LID building and things like that. That's certainly something council can consider at any time. So these were just some of the comments that we received on the cards that were either filled out on the spot or mailed in.
It was, I think at some of these open houses, and some of you probably heard this when you were there, it was amazing to me how once people may have come in with preconceived ideas, but just through the education process really were able to offer some really good insights and thoughts. And so I think kind of it's real easy when you have a group of 80 or 100 people in a room to get that education out. But I think that's going to be real important as we move forward to make sure we're doing the same kinds of educational items to educate the community on what it is, not only it's different about this one, but also what this project does with pictures and showing some of the infrastructure items, seeing in every single ward what projects they can drive down the street and actually see that help. And I know several of you mentioned when the unfortunate bridge went out over in 3 or 4 months ago now. It's probably been longer than I think. I know Councilmember Castleberry probably 2 months. It's moving fast. I know we're trying to help.
9 days.
So I think those are kinds of things that we're just going to have to educate our community on, that sometimes
I'm reminded of
how many days and seconds, right? So I think that's going to be real important. And that was really, really apparent by the way that responses changed even within the same open house.
I just can't stress enough how different these meetings were, these open houses were, than the 23 meetings that Sean and I went to last spring or spring before. And several of you were there too. But the difference was just really dramatic. Even though some people came in kind of angry, they sat down, they listened, they asked questions, and it was a really different feeling. I mean, clearly, many more things had been worked out this time than had been worked out before, and that was part of the problem. It was the hurrying. I'm sorry, Councilmember Castleberry.
I would point out on that though, on the first meetings, it was, this is the proposal you're going to be voting on.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Where this was,
These are some options.
these are some options, help us develop it.
Exactly.
So I think it was much better as, hey, we haven't come up with something, we're looking for your input, as opposed to, this is what we're gonna do, what do you think?
Absolutely.
So I think that helps. The
I
approach
completely agree.
It's changed. I think that tenor has changed quite a bit. And
That was critical. Yes, Councilmember Clark.
I would say moving forward on that, jumping ahead with your slides, with the direction from council, I'd love to have ward meetings specifically about this to get feedback from my residents before we decide what version we want to send forward on the ballot. So, and I would hope that this fabulous committee who's so well versed in stormwater in Norman, like Bill Scanlon, he's a Ward 6 representative, that he would be at that meeting. Again, I think it's effective when it's run by the citizen committee. And again, they are well versed in what the proposals are.
Yeah, they are. Councilmember Wilson.
I would like to point out that we talk a lot about Ward 5, that there are projects for Ward 5 and some of this, and I appreciate y'all's work on that. I appreciate how many times that was said and how many times that was considered and how hard it was to find projects in all the wards. However, I have a very weird ward. Mac, don't put that on in the paper, but we have a very urban place and they're really excited about getting the stormwater fixed. And we have east of 48th Street where it really is not a lot that they're going to really get, like tangible things. They're not getting a new drain. They're not getting a lot of things that Core Norman is getting. And I've thrown this out before that I thought it might be a place, some way to consider. Well, I have 2 points here. One is that if there was a way that we could exclude east of 48th Street from the utility portion, and I don't think that's legal. I'm not sure. I'm looking at Jeff but then we can talk about it offline or later. But the other thing is if we could really focus on the public-private partnership piece of the bond and have a dedicated piece that is road work for private roads, because I do think
Utility, I'm sorry.
Is it part of the utility?
Yeah,
it wouldn't be a
public-private.
bond for
Are you talking about the
infrastructure.
neighborhood assistance program?
Yeah, that's part of the
It's part of
utility.
the utility.
Well, is there part of the bond that I misunderstood that? I'm sorry. Is there
Private
part
roads
of
could certainly apply and get help through that program.
To the utility.
through the
through the utility.
utility?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I
are
misunderstood.
you thinking about paying for private?
Would be an application through the neighborhood.
Well, they're talking
assistance
about
program.
paying for dams. So why
Private
would that not be?
infrastructure, private stormwater infrastructure is the idea behind that neighborhood assistance, whether that be an organized neighborhood, maybe an HOA, maybe not an HOA, maybe it's, a private culvert and, I don't know, but anybody is eligible to apply.
So this has
So I'm not
actually
gonna say
changes
roads,
what I
I'm gonna
think,
say
but
private.
But I do think that the roads washing out to those degree, even the private roads, actually do cause problems. Not necessarily like Thunderbird probably, but some of them do. And I think that getting them fixed, getting some way for those 1970s era neighborhoods to get brought up to speed, people can't afford to do that. I would really like to see that be some component of this.
I think Councilmember
Scott?
Scott. And then Councilmember Carter. No, I'm sorry. I thought I saw your hand there. All right, and then Councilmember.
Okay, so I saw in the comments that one of them was, you should pay their fair share, and I'm wondering what that share is. How does that work for OU and apartment complexes?
So OU has their own MS4 permit, which is a stormwater management permit that they have, that we also have, that Norman has. So it's almost like a city within a city. They have their own permit that they have to meet requirements to DEQ. They pay a lot of money to maintain their system that's on their property, as well as when they build new buildings, putting that infrastructure in place. So they have a significant investment in stormwater. But no one on the committee, including the OU representative, was of the mind that they would pay nothing. But he was of the mind that negotiations would begin when something passes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you've
So-
been willing to.
Yeah.
With-
But they also already make a significant investment in stormwater management as it sits now.
And that was prior to the new president coming in.
Good point.
That is correct. That's absolutely correct. But
And
things
the-
could be very different now. I don't know.
And I imagine that's just campus area. That's not anything north of Boyd or south.
If OU owns the property.
OU
is
owns
what we-
property, so there's other property that's owned there.
Okay. And then with the
They do pay the utility in Oklahoma City and they pay it in Tulsa
Okay.
on those, at those OU
At those
campuses.
campuses, they also pay those.
They don't have a stormwater permit in the city.
That's
They
correct.
do not.
I don't think
They
they
do
do.
not.
They don't have, yeah. Did he say that they don't have stormwater permits there?
The campuses aren't large enough. Yeah.
So they have to have.
Okay, Councilmember Hahn.
They don't have a choice.
I don't think she
Yeah,
was
my
done.
follow-up was just on apartment complexes. Are those considered non-residential or are those residential?
If it has
Or
4 or
units.
more dwelling units, it's considered non-residential.
Okay.
Okay, so if it has,
Quadplex or below.
yeah, is considered residential.
Thank you.
I was just gonna mention something about Ward 5 because I was able to go to the Little X meeting, and there were a lot of questions about how do we benefit out there from this. And you guys talked a lot about the maintenance crew teams. That would be, I think, 4 teams, and that something about one possibly being dedicated to that area. That if there was a big deal in the city, of course, they could be brought in, but that their responsibility would be to go through and make sure all those culverts and bridges and roads are being maintained. Was really maybe the primary benefit that rural residents would see from the utility.
Well, and they seemed pretty positive about that too,
Yeah.
once that was explained,
The
right?
crew thing.
They were like, oh,
really
we like that.
Yeah, that's correct. Let me add just a little bit to that. So one of the things that we talked about at that open house was the limited staff that we have right now, right? We have 2 infrastructure maintenance crews, a channel maintenance crew and a true infrastructure maintenance crew for the entire city, 190 square miles for the city of Norman. We're stretched very thin on that. What the utility would help fund are 2 additional crews. And what I'd eventually like to be able to do with those additional crews is section up the city and give them districts that it's their primary responsibility to address maintenance needs in those particular areas. And so that's where Rural Ward 5 would get direct benefit because, when we have drainage ditches or culverts or bridges that have debris removal that's needed or sediment removal that's needed to continue to maintain the flow, then we would have the crew to send out that way. Right now, as it stands, especially with all the rain we've gotten in the past couple of months, what I'm getting are calls saying, I've got a sinkhole in my backyard, or we're seeing the roadway over top in this location. And I have to say, I've got you on the list. As soon as a crew frees up, we'll get out to your area. And that could be 6 months from now. So those are the direct type of benefits that Ward 5 would see from that. And they see the same types of public education and outreach and activities. I'll throw a plug in. We're having a cleanup at Little Axe Community Park and disc golf on Sunday, 3 to 5. So we do those things across the city. So the utility would help to fund those types of activities as well. So we're trying to make sure that we get to the whole city. The MS4 requirements apply to the entire city, not just the urban centers.
Didn't we just clean up that park? Or was that a year ago?
We haven't actually
That was Lakeview.
visited this park.
Oh, it was
We
Lakeview.
visited
Yeah.
Lakeview last year. And then on the November 3rd, we'll be having our 3rd annual Lake Thunderbird workshop at the boathouse at the state park. So yet another opportunity to
On
come out
November 3rd,
and make it. Yes, November 3rd, 1 to 3.
I'll be out of town.
We have to coordinate that.
You
Sorry.
could win a prize if you have enough trash.
That's right.
So, Councilmember Castleberry.
Regarding the general fund contribution, I guess this is a question for Mr. Francisco. As things are right now, how realistic is it to think that the general fund can keep paying $3.1 million for stormwater?
Well, the question would be needs relative to other things in the general fund. The general fund revenues are exceeded by expenditures for all things. So if we continue to spend $3.1 million on stormwater needs and revenues continue to be exceeded by expenditures, then some expenditures in some other areas would have to be reduced to pay for the stormwater needs.
And that is 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now?
Before it goes negative?
Yeah.
2.5, 3 years.
So my point is, not doing anything. 3 years from now, the general fund is negative. So it is not realistic to think that the general fund can continue to contribute $3 million to stormwater unless you want to cut other areas of the general fund.
I would just say,
I'm trying to make that point.
I completely understand what you're saying.
I try to make that.
We have to be very careful that whatever program our citizens pass, whether that's a $5 million program or a $6 million program or a $7.4 million program, we're making promises to do all these things based on that dollar amount. And we don't want to pass something. Whatever the decision council makes, we do not want to pass a $7.4 million program and next year it's $5.4 million. Talk about transparency and trust issues with the city. So I think that's a very important thing for the council to deliberate on and be realistic about what we're promising our residents that is going to be delivered to them.
Well, that's my concern. Is I don't think we can keep that promise.
So that's.
And at your other right there, if we're generating $4.1 million and we're paying 3.1, we're actually doing $1 million more for stormwater than we are currently now.
That's true. But then we have to backscale our budget and show that to our residents.
It's still not enough for stormwater needs. I get it. But it's also 33% more that we're spending on stormwater than we were the prior year. And we're not spending 33% more on any other area in the budget.
Certainly things to consider.
Just to follow up on that issue, all the 4 existing city utilities pay for themselves, are not subsidized at all by the general fund. And if we're going to subsidize this utility, I mean, there's an argument to be made by all the utilities that, we could lower trash and water and recycling and wastewater fees too if we just subsidize those utilities with the general fund. So I do worry about, I understand we've got to get something passed and there's some large numbers here, but I think we really all have to really consider the reasons why we shouldn't subsidize this utility, considering the fact we don't subsidize the others. And, again, we could lower rates for everything if we just subsidized those utilities, but I don't think we should. I think the purpose of utilities is to provide dedicated funding sources for problems like these that the general fund isn't consistent enough to handle. So just something to think about.
I totally agree. I just wonder what is realistic for us to get passed. And if we go another year without getting it passed and another year, we're just following farther and farther behind. Councilmember Hahn.
Well, to both of those points, I don't even know if we have the historical perspective of how these other utilities fared when we first established them. Yeah. We don't know. I mean, I don't think it's fair to compare brand new utilities with ones that have been operational with rate increases for decades. I don't know if anyone back there can speak to that, but I have a feeling that we were probably paying for trash before we implemented a fee to collect it. The same for water, the same for sewer. I mean, nothing just blossoms out of the blue and then we have a utility to pay for it. I mean, so while I don't disagree, I just don't necessarily think that it's a fair comparison to compare utilities that have been, fully functional and operational for decades versus one that is starting. Should we have the historical perspective of how our trash service, became a monthly fee and what we were subsidizing, if at all, in the beginning? I think that would be a fairer comparison.
I think you address that.
Wastewater is the most recent one.
And while you're addressing that from a public finance standpoint, if it's an enterprise fund or utility fund, how normal is it do you see subsidized from the general fund?
That's totally a decision of the governing body. It is unusual to have a utility that is not self-funding. The goal of a utility is to identify the full cost of providing that utility service and have the users of that utility pay the full cost of that utility. But there are certainly cases where there are subsidies to public utilities, and there are certainly cases where the utilities are in the general fund. In smaller cities, the utilities are usually in the general fund. And in Norman's case, full enterprise accounting was established in 1988. Before 1988, all the utilities were in the general fund. There were utility fees being charged. And I would submit that certainly the water fee was paying for more than the cost of providing the water service. That's why in 1975, if you'll recall, the citizens passed a charter restriction against utility rates being raised without a vote of the people, because there was a water rate increase that paid for police services. And that's why that was placed, and that's why we in Norman historically have placed a very high value on identifying the cost of the utilities and having them sort of separated out and paying for the full cost of utilities from the fees.
We have some more. We have the next survey to present.
Hot off the presses.
Because we know we're on a time limit here. So this is the one that was discussed. Feels like last week, maybe it was the week before, regarding transportation and stormwater possibly being on the same ballot. That was literally completed when you all received it via email about 3 hours ago. So, and we got it at the same time. So you want to?
Yeah, survey results. The first question was, the city is considering stormwater and transportation projects to address infrastructure needs in Norman. Do you think that they should be proposed separately or collectively or not at all as the power goes out? I think you,
No.
we're back.
Sorry.
So the answer was really that there was, at least in this survey, there was the idea that separately might be the best. 30% were together and then 10% unsure.
But they weren't prioritized in that question.
They were not prioritized of which one was the was important to prioritize, stormwater or transportation. How would you prioritize this next question? And that's where you get to focus on stormwater infrastructure was 34%. And you focus on stormwater and transportation infrastructure together was 29%. And then just transportation, 21%. There's not a funding part of that question. So realize that also that could play a part in some of the answers on this too. But again, just simple questions.
But 63% supported stormwater in some way, whether that was on the same ballot as transportation or not. I just wanted to point that out.
So went back to the same kind of question you saw from the earlier survey, which is, do you think flooding in Norman is a critical safety issue, a minor safety issue? And you can see that 90%, very similar to what was said in March, think that it is an issue. So whether that be minor or critical, they felt like it is an issue. Next question, we're back to the $59 million bond proposal. Would you be supportive of a bond proposal? And very much an even split on this. 42% yes, 42% no, 17% unsure. So kind of I think I call that the educational opportunity. So that's where we have to make sure. So.
I would tell you, this is the first question. I mean, we did discuss it some in open houses where an actual number was mentioned as to what it would add to your property taxes. Of course, we have that in our recommendations, estimations, and people would ask in open houses and we would tell them. But this was the first time in a survey type forum where that number was put in there. Also, to keep in mind, these people haven't seen a list of projects or a budget. They don't know what that necessarily means. So that goes back to the education part that Andy just mentioned. So at our open houses, once people learned about the projects and the lists, they were much more likely to support it.
So the next question was a very similar question to what was asked in March. It's whether or not you favor a flat fee and for the utility versus the size of home or something else, kind of a tiered structure. And as March just kind of pulled those numbers back, it was 44% was the size of home and 26% was flat fee. So real close to the same numbers came back in this, which tells me that's probably pretty indicative of kind of where things
It's
are.
interesting that on the phone surveys, the tiered rate seems to be the preference, pretty much. But in some of the discussions, even in the meeting, the board meeting that you had, and there weren't very many people there, but there was kind of a preference for the flat fee when they heard the flat fee. So it's interesting that the people at the meeting we seem to hear a little more about the flat fee, but on the phone survey, it makes it really hard to make the determination unless we were really ready to go for the fee and say, all right, we're getting ready to put this on the ballot, so you better tell us now.
Well, I think there's also, Mayor, in the open houses, we were able to list what was where your house fell within the tiering system. And so many of the people I think that fell, their tiered amount ended up being very close to the same amount as the flat fee. So when you're in the open house, then it became more about simplicity. Whereas I think on a phone survey, without listing how big how much the square footage is, then it's hard to define. So that's a one thought.
Well,
I have a small home. It's kind of the natural inclination. Whereas I think many people would fall within that $6, which compared to $6.25 is their own.
I would point out on this one, just only 18% supported no fee.
Yeah.
Pretty good. I mean,
I think that's really good.
Do you think that improving our transportation infrastructure like roads and highways is a critical safety issue? And again, I think most people feel like having infrastructure roads highly important, pretty strong. We would all kind of expect that. 86% said it's an issue that needs to be addressed. We got into the city of Norman is also considering a $70 million bond package to fund transportation infrastructure. And it said we did, in this particular case, did reference, and this is a later question and it was asked, did reference that the property tax rate level would remain the same. So that certainly changes, I think, some people's minds about how that looks like. And again, 2/3 said that they would support that. And I don't recall exactly what the last transportation bond passed by, but it was in that same range, like a little higher actually, maybe. So, okay, the stormwater and transportation proposals or propositions were on the same ballot next year to help improve the quality of life in Norman and with infrastructure, kind of an infrastructure package, if you will. So it's not transportation or stormwater; it's overall infrastructure. Then you see the numbers there. 40% said that they would favor both together. Transportation bond only, 26%. Stormwater bond and the utility, so just stormwater only, would be the 10%. So just kind of give you an idea of.
This is the one that stormwater was more than the transportation by itself.
Well, I think this is the one that basically says that both together is the ideal situation for at least these particular people. These particular responders. The transportation bond only was 26%, whereas the stormwater by itself is only 10%. So I think that if you're comparing what the voters want to have from this question, you would say putting them together would make some sense.
you know, Hahn, you guys, I think, received Hahn's kind of quick report on these surveys. But one thing they say is, in general, people support bonds by these numbers, right? In general, overall, they support bonds. And if you look at the stormwater numbers, you have 40% that support combining them, but you have another 10% that support it by itself. You got 50% right there that support something in stormwater, right? Something. So.
Councilmember Bowman has a question.
Does together mean together on the same ballot or mixed together like we have talked about?
I don't know that the question.
Transportation bond, half being stormwater.
The intent was on the same ballot. I'm not sure we did a good job having that explaining that in the survey.
Doing the full 59 million stormwater bond and doing the 72.
That was the intent.
Yeah,
So it would be
was-
like three different measures on
Right.
one ballot.
Utilities,
was-
But I'm not
bond,
sure we did a good
transportation.
enough job explaining that.
Well, this was the
in the
question.
survey.
This was the question on the survey. So I think, you can read that into that. However, a responder, yeah, it's a great point. I don't know that because we knew that was kind of we thought it'd be three different items because of the nature of the timing and the conversations that we'd understood from the last.
But we know
item.
that. Probably a lot of residents don't know that. I mean, they don't know anything about that, So that was.
It's your question.
So some key takeaways, obviously, flooding is an issue in Norman. 63% felt the need to focus on stormwater either by itself or with transportation. More stormwater education and information is needed. And there is support for placing stormwater on the transportation initiatives on the same ballot. A couple of things, and it's in the report you all received from Hahn, that quick. But a couple of things that they said is these numbers are favorable, especially before, much education or communication plan has been done on the specifics of what would be on the ballot. They're still pretty favorable, believe it or not. I mean, I know at first glance, maybe you feel like they're not. And when I say favorable, I'm talking about them being on the same ballot.
I thought that 63% was really amazing. I thought 42% was pretty good, honestly, considering where we've come from on stormwater. I thought it was pretty good, but I thought that figure was really.
They also said that larger turnout, a ballot that has multiple things on it, obviously brings a larger turnout, right? And that usually ends up being more successful in getting bond initiatives passed when you have a larger turnout. When you have something and this is general data that they have from what they do across the country. When you have something that sits on the ballot by itself, the only people that are going to turn out to vote for it are people that are really for it or really against it. And we know that probably, it feels like at times anyway, a lot of people are really against stormwater at all. So if it's on a ballot by itself, you might be jeopardizing it, is the point. So that was another reason why they said it's a good idea to put it with other things. We had talked about transportation because that's upcoming, but I just wanted to pass that information along. You don't get the less motivated people who aren't that interested in that one specific issue show up. I think.
So now I think just kind of those are kind of key takeaways that we had. So now I think I'll speak for Amanda, maybe for the entire our citizens committee, is we wanted to ask for direction. We are, I think, a dedicated 16-member committee that is happy to do whatever council thinks is the best next step, and certainly would appreciate that. But we felt like after getting the survey results, after having the open houses, after talking through the focus groups, I feel like the proposal that the Citizens Committee brought forth with its original recommendations and the alternatives all seem to be right in line with what really we heard. And certainly, Councilmember Casper, your concerns are warranted. There's other things that need to be tweaked and thought through. I don't think that, I represent only one member of the committee and not the other 15 members, but I think we're open to any of those alternatives from a Citizens Committee to support the effort to try to move this forward. I think there was some desire, I think, to find from a stormwater perspective and the combination, listening to Hahn, that to put the items together, that were something that was going to run in the springtime, depending upon what each of you felt like was appropriate. We feel like as a stormwater, I guess, from at least the co-chairs here, as a stormwater co-chairs, not representing or polling the committee, felt like that would be the most advantageous thing for stormwater. And so that's something we would want you to consider when you're thinking about how you want to approach solving a major issue within our community. And I think that's important for you to think about as we're moving forward. So we have some simple questions that we put on the slides, and we thought we'd put these in order because it helps us at least be supportive of your efforts and your desires as a council. And so the first one we wanted to just ask is the GO bond package for stormwater infrastructure improvements acceptable to council? So it's a $59.6 million general obligations bond package with 3 projects minimum in every single ward. Does that work? Is that the right, are we happy with that? Because that allows us to kind of check that one off the list, so to speak.
Councilmember Hickman.
I've told you guys, I always try to be a very straightforward, pragmatic person, and it's not, I personally have concerns with the bond package. I understand and appreciate the interest and desire to have 3 projects in every ward. I think the data tells us that the citizens want critical flooding issues addressed. When our Main Street and Gray Street are impassable and you can't get across the city east to west almost over a stretch of a mile because of flooding out of the Imhoff Channel. Thankfully, that happened at night and there weren't many people on the street, but we had cars flooded in parking lots of businesses. That happened in the middle of the day would have been tremendous disruption to ongoing commerce, businesses, as well as safety of kids and others, because it was very near where Lahoma is, near the high school. The fact that, and I'm not saying it's an easy solution. I've talked to Sean a little bit about it. I don't know what the solution is, but I think we either need to be prepared to address why we're not going to resolve the Lake Lahoma issue. I think we learned from prior discussions that Lake McGee, as people refer to it, easy buzzwords are good things to raise by citizens who will be opposed and raise concerns about this bond package when they can refer to Lake Lahoma, which many people know about and have seen the pictures of, including the repeated flooding that those people on the cul-de-sac there experience, in addition to the public safety issues it creates when our Main Street and Gray Street and Sims and Dawes right here behind City Hall were flooded and the helicopters flying over showing pictures of vehicles, in the ditches. And we're not solving that problem with this bond package that presumably is going to be in place for 10 to 12, 15 years. I don't know. We either have to have to me, in my opinion, a really good explanation for why that's not a priority when critical flooding is something that the people care about. Or B, we need to reconsider, are we going to address infrastructure projects that are the true needs in our community based on the criteria that we've developed? And I believe if we apply that criteria, and public safety is one of those critical needs, that's part of why the Main Street Bridge project is getting fixed now, because it was flooding, blocking the street. You couldn't go across Main Street out to 48th for public safety issues. I have the pictures to show that you could not get across Main and Gray and Sims and Dawes, just this year on a major flooding event that, yes, happened at night, so not many people were impacted by it or saw it. But the fact that you could not traverse almost a mile stretch of our community because roads were closed, to me, is a critical flooding and therefore public safety issue. And that is my main concern about the bond. Is it's nice to spread things around for politics, but if the data tells us that people want critical flooding issues addressed, then I think we should focus on the critical projects.
Councilmember Bickman, I sympathize because most of the great big projects are inward 2 and inward 4. The big projects. If we're going to do a citywide bond issue, we have to consider the fact that we want people all over Norman to vote for it. We can't win a bond election with just 1 ward or 2 wards. Mr. O'Leary.
I was just answering the question they asked.
So you don't have an issue with the bond itself. You think it's a good idea to fix infrastructure. Your issues with the projects that were delineated. Is that correct? I mean, I'm just trying to understand.
I want to be able to say to the residents, we understand critical flooding is a concern to you, and we are addressing the critical flooding issues with our infrastructure projects that are prioritized based on those factors, being public safety, infrastructure, flooding, etc. That's not what we have done, with all due respect. We have, but we've made sure that we've then allocated that to 3 projects in every ward, which means that, for example, a number 9 or 11, I don't know what number project for sure of the overall city ranking is not getting done, but an overall project ranked 60 something in the city is getting done because it happens to fall in a ward that doesn't have as many stormwater flooding needs. And I understand, I'm not a politician, but we have to be political. It's a vote of the people, and that's why we're doing that.
Well, and
I'm just saying, to me, that's not being fair to the people and transparent to the people. We're putting something on a ballot, a bond that addresses critical flooding needs.
Before we go on, Mr. O'Leary.
I'm just answering your question. I'm straight up guy.
What about, give us just a big ballpark idea about what that would cost, and could that be part of the transportation bond?
Lake Lahoma, you mean?
Yes, this whole area down here, Gray and Main and Imhoff and.
Let me offer first, Mayor, that I think Amanda said that the projects included in the proposal are the top ranked projects in each ward. Now, again, Lake Oklahoma, that's really a new term. I haven't heard that before in Norman until just recent year or so. But this issue in central core area, it just isn't ranked in Ward 4 to make that final cut. Doesn't mean it's not important. But it is included in the Stormwater Master Plan. You know, as I told Councilmember Hickman recently, the real solution to this problem here is kind of twofold. One is to buy several homes and clear them from the floodplain. Just remove several homes from the floodplain. It's cheaper to buy the homes than to try to build a structure that would prevent the flooding. They've been flooding for 50 years. And then the second part of that is to create a detention basin in Andrews Park. And while we as engineers think that's a great solution, it has been poorly received by council and citizens and parks directors and others since we released the Stormwater Master Plan. But we know how to do it. The solutions, frankly, aren't really favorable to others, homeowners, council members, parks directors, and so on. But we know how to do it. I think the numbers, Mayor, if I had to just throw a number at it right now, that's easily a $5 to $10 million package to do all those things in Hahn Creek in this portion. Now, I think the proposal does include several million in Hahn Creek in the downstream areas, which were the higher priority in the plan.
Okay, Councilmember Wilson and then Holman.
I'm curious on the ranking of those projects, the top 3 projects in each ward, yes, but overall rankings, I'm going to guess there were some projects probably in 2 and 4 that were above the ones in 5.
Oh, certainly.
Certainly.
A priority in 5 might have been number 42 in the city,
Right.
but it was number 1 in Ward 5. Sure.
And we don't have to get into it right now as far as you and I can talk offline, or you and I, whoever I need to talk to about what those projects entail that are in Ward 5. But I would just throw out as I don't think that those projects from my ward's perspective, I know I tend to speak from the rural, perspective, but those 3 projects not being at all east of 48th, I don't think gains you any political ground for the rural folks. Now, I appreciate it because it is something in my ward that needs to be done. I would be concerned though that if we, and it may not be true, but if we've bumped a really critical project down the list to put one, just to say we had one in Ward 5 up the list, you know what I'm saying? It would just, I don't know how that falls.
I just want to make it clear, the committee did not decide on these
I
projects.
know, I'm looking past you back
okay,
there.
good, yeah. We didn't go through every project and say, put that one on the list.
I know
and put one
that
on
Carrie
the
and
list.
Sean did those.
We decided we weren't going to do that.
Yeah, and I know why it was done. So, and I appreciate it, but it'd be an interesting
Would it be okay,
conversation.
Mayor, if you'd be okay, I think maybe to move on to the next question, what I heard you say is maybe some project questions, but generally, I didn't hear anybody jump up and say, I just don't like this bond proposal. Is that, I mean, again, other things we decided, but I feel like that's an important.
For the most part, I think we're pretty close on the bond with the possibility of maybe looking at Ward 5 either for something farther out, if there is something, or making sure that when we do the education piece, the piece that I think could make a big difference in Ward 5, not just the roads, but the fact that those culverts, those streams, those creeks, all those tributaries running, there's flooding all along 72nd and 84th, all around the lake. And I think if they knew that this was going to help get those cleaned out and stop somebody in my church, their house was ruined because a creek was all blocked and it flooded their whole place. So,
But that'd be the utility part of it.
but that's what I'm saying. But in the in the education piece, if we could really stress that would be something that would help. Councilmember Carter.
So is your question, Andy, is a bond issue or a $59 million bond issue? Like, is that number a firm number? Or?
Well, I think when nothing's firm, I mean, by this is really an open dialogue. I think that the question I think implies that what's been recommended, the 59.6, but that was my mindset was there, but I'm open to other ideas and thoughts.
You might explain why.
59.6 based on the millage allows that, that's the maximum, allows a 50 plus 1% vote. Anything above that requires a different kind of percentage vote.
But you know, I'm certainly in favor of a bond, and I think the dollar amount to be determined along with the project.
Okay, that's fair.
Councilmember Hahn.
Yeah, I'm supportive of the bond. The maximum amount that we can do, I'm all for that. I think we need to do as much as we possibly can do. From my ward, all the concerns are addressed in Ward 7. The biggest flooding problem in Ward 7 and in the top 5 in the city is addressed through this, which I appreciate. But I do agree that maybe thinking about some other ways to address the issue with Lahoma. I know that's not a it's not a roadway project, really. It's what Sean mentioned about. And maybe some of those downstream improvements will help some of that a little bit. But I agree we've got to maybe think about prioritizing that as an issue. And, if other council members have other projects they're thinking of. But for me, it works really well. I like it. For the fee, I do have quite a bit of heartburn about a flat fee, even a tiered fee that I've seen a little bit, because under the flat fee, a majority of Ward 7 residents will pay significantly more than they would have paid under the plan that failed previously. And I'll have to explain to them why they're going to pay more and why someone with a home that's 10 times larger than theirs is going to pay very little more, or if it's a flat fee, nothing more. I think Ward 7 residents are overall willing to support the greater good of the city and pay more if that's what it takes to get it done. But it is something I'll have to explain to them. And so a flat fee is really concerning to me, and a tiered fee where the difference is only $3 to $9 is a little bit difficult for me as well.
Councilmember Clark.
I'll go back to what I said earlier. I want the opportunity to have a ward meeting and educate my residents and get their feedback on which option is preferred.
We don't know what the next steps are. That's what we're asking you for in essence tonight. We don't know what to do. We don't have anything next planned. That's why we're asking for direction.
Councilmember Bateman.
Just two things real quick. I agree with Councilmember Clark. I think that's what I had said when we were forming this committee was I would like for us to build in time so that we could go back to our constituents from a ward perspective and get feedback from them. I know y'all have had the town hall meetings, but I think the ward specific meetings are helpful. Then we reconvene and bring in our notes and say, here's what my group said and here's what my group said. And then we hash it out and try to come to something. I will say that as we're running out of time, and part of the discussion here was about timing for the stormwater and bond election. That is what worries me about trying to do stormwater in April. I don't want to push it off, but at the same time, we have to vote on those. We'll have to actually vote as council in January. The two meetings are in January, and it's almost November and the holidays. And so we have, in theory, 60 days to get this done. Can we hold 8 ward meetings, address the bond package and projects, discuss and debate, maybe adding another tier or two, if that's maybe what, that's kind of what I'm thinking about on the rate structure. Do we send that back to the committee? Do we have the committee reconvene and bless whatever we might change? Because I think that is important to say that this is the committee's recommendation. Can we get those things done in 60 days? I don't know. I'm nervous about that. So I do think the ward meetings are a good idea. I mean, I think I said that in May of last year when we started this process. And so, it's hard for me to say definitively what I feel like I will support as far as a rate structure, because I want to hear from some of my constituents. I think I have an idea, but I think it's fair that we get an opportunity to go to them ourselves with like y'all have in the townhouses.
Okay,
Town halls.
Councilmember Bierman and then Scott. And we only have 10 minutes.
Yep, I'll make it fast. I have been thinking for a while that I don't want to rush this, and I'm starting to feel rushed. Not only do I want to get some feedback on rate structure from a ward meeting, we also still have education on what we come up with to accomplish before a vote. And I don't know that we can do all of that in 60 days. It's unfortunate that we got to the point where all of a sudden we realize this transportation bond needs to happen before it falls off the rolls, but that's what we're dealing with. And so I want to keep moving forward on stormwater, but I think we need to scrap any artificial timeline and do what we think we need to do to make sure that we can educate people well enough to get a positive vote on whatever rate structure we come up with.
Councilmember Scott.
I support the bond. And as the rate structure, you were at the board meeting when they did kind of express some flat fee is okay, but it was at the lower rate. And then based on the poll here, it looked like it was more of a tiered fee that people would vote for. So I don't know how I feel. I haven't decided. And maybe a board meeting that brought more people would be great, but I'm not sure that we can always count on that. We're only going to get the people who are already educated and involved. So I know that something needs to be done. And if people are going to support, as per the polls, they would support putting voting for stormwater with transportation on the same ballot. I don't think there's any reason to wait longer on this. I think we need to make a decision and move forward.
Councilmember.
I'm
just thinking really slow tonight. I'm sorry.
We've spent 2 years on this. I don't see that we're rushing anything. We spent 2 years talking about this. Now, I think that I support having the bonds for stormwater and transportation in April and the utility later. But I think the utility part is what is the NH part, whether it's tiered. I mean, like, we've got more work to do on the utility part of it. But I think people will understand infrastructure, and they will vote for bonds to fix the infrastructure. And we've got to do transportation. So if you're going to do transportation, you might as well put the stormwater projects on there also. So,
Councilmember.
To make it clear, I support moving forward and voting on this in April. We were talking about stormwater solutions in 2016 when I first ran for office, and this is getting ridiculous. We've been talking about this for a long time. It's not new. I think that the committee has done an amazing job of putting together options, and it can't be that difficult to have a ward meeting to get feedback. Just throwing that out there. I'm ready to move forward with this. We love to say the phrase kick the can. That should be the city motto. I mean, good Lord, it's time to take action on this.
Do we need to reconvene the committee? I know we have 5 minutes, Mayor, so I just want to know, do we need to reconvene the committee? Because if we are, to Council Member Clark's thoughts, then I think that's, well, I mean, if we're ready to move forward, then we need to. And that's really the
We
question.
haven't had our board meetings, so there's no feedback.
I think you got to have your board meetings first.
Okay.
Let us kind of come up with what.
I think
Keep your holiday season open.
If everybody's willing to get a board meeting together, and some of you do them regularly, so it shouldn't be that difficult to get a board meeting together, so that we could get that feedback. I will say again, what I really, truly believe, if we do transportation in February, and we still have a couple of weeks to decide that, if we do transportation in February, we can't turn around and do stormwater in April. These are either together in April, or we have made the decision to put stormwater off till August or September or somewhere next year.
Well, we talked about doing transportation in February and stormwater in May at our retreat, and nobody said that then. We all thought at the time a February transportation bond and a stormwater vote in May was fine. I mean, that's what we said.
We all didn't say that. I didn't say anything.
Okay.
That's also what our polling shows.
And I'm telling you, based on what I've seen in other cities and what I just saw here, that is my recommendation. Whether everyone else thought that at the retreat, that's fine. I'm saying what I believe. I believe, based on this information, what I've seen other cities do, this is our best chance to get a stormwater bond issue, to put it together with transportation. So that's what I'm saying. Councilmember Bowman, I thought you had your hand up.
No, but I would say that I think the stormwater bond and utility do have to go together.
I have a logistical question for your ward meetings, because there's one tomorrow night. What do you all envision that you're wanting the committee to do as far as?
That's why I was almost.
And maybe you don't have to answer that now. You can get
Before we
with,
do this.
you can get with us individually and say, this is kind of what I envision. I went to Ward 8. I live in Ward 8. I gave out handouts of the funding posters and said, these are the options we presented, and kind of gave an update, and that was what we did. But like I said, we just need, from a logistical standpoint, what you would like from the committee or committee members in your ward meetings. And maybe they're different across every ward meeting. I don't know.
I personally would love one of you and my Ward 6 representatives from the committee. And
do you want handouts, or do you want posters, or do you want?
I mean, what we had at the,
Bring that one
yeah,
else.
at the, I mean, we've already got the materials.
Yeah, we do. Yes, we do.
Okay,
I know you're.
we're out of time. We have, community transportation on, and planning on Thursday. If people want to set up a board meeting, then you need to talk to Brenda.
Second Saturday, November.
When should we have our work meeting?
So, every time we go to Kitty Hill. They're legends.
Later.
We need to go forward.